Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, a podcast that aims to address divorce, separation and co-parenting here in the UK, countering the often sensationalist way it's portrayed in the media, challenging the status quo and driving for reform. On each episode, I'm joined by experts to discuss divorce, separation and co-parenting from different angles and to give their opinions and to debate them. I'm Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor and divorce coach, co-founder of Amicable, the divorce services company, and host of the Divorce Podcast. In this episode, I was joined by co-parenting coach Marcie Shaoul to discuss managing strong emotions and inflammatory language when you're parenting post-separation. Marcie is a thought leader in co-parenting, and she's the founder of the Co-Parent Way, the UK's only specialist co-parenting coaching practice. We talked about tools for helping to manage strong emotions when you're separating with children. Marcie told me that fear is often the overriding emotion couples experience when facing the prospect of no longer living with their kids full time. We discussed ways to tackle the fear and other emotions like anger. I think we've said this before on the podcast, but Marcie reminded me again about the importance of self-care and putting on your own oxygen mask first to regulate your emotions. Marcie considered how using inflammatory language is a conscious choice, and we talked about why a parent might make that choice when it inevitably leads to escalations, and that whilst you can't prevent your spouse from using inflammatory language, you can change the way that you respond rather than react by hitting that pause button before replying. We also looked at Marcie's new course for co-parents, and you can find a link to this in the show notes. If you really loved this episode or want to hear more episodes like this, then please make sure to rate us on your preferred listening platform. Enjoy the episode. Welcome, Marcie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us. You're a podcast regular and we love having you on because you give us such practical hints and tips about co-parenting in a really positive way. So it's great to see you. Thank you. Today, we're going to explore how we manage strong emotions and how we contain inflammatory language as a co-parent. And the reason we're chatting about this is that you have designed and developed the most amazing co-parenting course. So it's an opportunity to talk about the course and the benefits it can bring to people who are going through that transition from parent to co-parent. So tell us, to start with, Marcie, a little bit about the kind of coaching you do, and then we'll get on to talking about that wonderful course.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, so coaching isn't therapy. That's probably the first thing to say. Coaching's all about enabling people to move forward from where they are now and breaking patterns. And in co-parenting, when it's difficult, that can be really helpful because we identify patterns where people are stuck, where parents are maybe very involved in their story and are forgetting that they have to parent together. So co-parent coaching is designed to be really practical because we need practical when we're co-parenting, and it gives parents the tools to self-manage and to communicate and to de-escalate conflict and to make decisions together effectively. And it works, it's very conversational, but it is actually very structured and focused on what's the best outcome for the children.
Do you think that you need to have your own individual kind of either therapy or coaching before you come into this? Or can you come, with all your brokenness and your damage? What works better?
Our job is to meet people where they are. So if they are having a very high conflict separation, we meet them there. And if it's very amicable and they're just kind of going about their business and they just want to learn some extra co-parenting skills, then we meet them there. What we don't do is we don't work with parents where there are significant safeguarding issues. That's not for us. That's probably more of a therapeutic approach.
So we'd call that a red flag. So let's just run through some examples of where that wouldn't probably work then. So I'm thinking immediately of maybe cases where there's domestic violence involved and it wouldn't perhaps be safe for people to try and work together because of the risk of being manipulated or put into a very harmful situation. Are there any other kind of scenarios where it really wouldn't be appropriate, just so we get that out the way?
It's pretty much the domestic violence one. There are extreme cases of coercive control where it's not safe because it's emotionally unsafe for parents to work together. But mostly if it's like slightly narcissistic or there's a bit of, controlling behavior, mostly we can deal with that. But our job is to recognize that and to kind of to tell people that they should be aware of that.
Because I liked what you said before about meeting people where they are, because there are a lot of labels that fly around these days, aren't there, in this kind of area that we work in, where everyone's very keen to label narcissistic behavior. And that's not to say that it doesn't happen or it doesn't occur. But sometimes we have to, like you say, work with what's in front of us, even if they are really difficult behaviors. And it sounds like this is still something that could be useful to people.
I think the other thing to say is, if you are in a difficult relationship and you are trying to kind of get yourself out of that relationship, the coaching course, which we'll come on to later, or coaching one-on-one rather than co-parent coaching, can be really useful for you to set boundaries, to learn how to communicate, and all those skills that you would ideally be doing with someone, you can still learn the skill set on your own, and it helps in that self-management, boundary setting, feeling safe as well. It's probably quite important to say that.
Yeah, I think that really is a massive sort of deal, isn't it? Because I know with what we do at Amicable, we work exclusively with couples. So, we have to have both people on board. But what you're saying is, to be a really good co-parent, it doesn't necessitate both of you being at the same level or both of you having done a course. It sounds to me like just one of you doing the course could still bring significant benefits to your kids.
Absolutely, because if you're functioning well and if you are feeling stable and you have resilience, then your children can see that demonstration. And, we all know that demonstration and showing rather than just telling and not doing is better. So absolutely 100%.
And I liked what you were saying about, it can teach you how to hold your own boundaries. So if you are working with a parent who is pushing those boundaries in whatever way, the fact that you know how to hold the boundary can still be quite a protective factor, both for yourself and the children, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, and it can really help with some of those situations where control is an issue or there's a power dynamic, because if you can change the way you interact with the other parent, then, by default, they are going to change the way that they interact with you. Because if you change your behavior, the pattern is broken. So I know I'm making it sound really simple and it's not like a quick, one-time fix, but, with consistency and with being persistent with it does definitely have an impact.
And why do we care so much about this? We do talk a lot about co-parenting and trying to do things amicably. What are the benefits of being able to co-parent effectively? What do you see? What do you hear?
There's one really massive benefit, which is why I do this work, and that is when you can co-parent effectively, your children can be safe and stable, emotionally safe and emotionally stable. So think for a minute, if you were walking down the street with your child and let's say you have a 5-year-old and they're carrying a ball, the ball goes out into the road and they run out into the road, there's a bus coming. What do? You instinctively kind of go out after them, you grab them, you bring them back, you put yourself in harm's way to protect them. What we know is that if we don't protect children mentally from harm, emotionally from harm, then it has really negative consequences. So if you're not trying to co-parent well, and if you're not making effective decisions with your co-parent and you're not communicating with them, whatever you feel about them, you don't have to like them, then you're effectively pushing your child in front of the bus or into the road. So it's our responsibility to co-parent because we have a responsibility to them, to our children as parents. And when we can co-parent, if we imagine it like a nice loop around them, two parents holding up that loop and the children standing in the middle, the loop is held up by effective decision-making and communication and a little bit of respect. It doesn't need to be held up by friendship and love and, camaraderie. It just needs to be enough. Your children need to see enough communication so they feel safe and stable and they know that their parents can communicate with each other. And if they know that, they can still be kids and they can grow up, in an appropriate way, safe in the knowledge that, their parents are making the decisions. They don't have to worry. They can go off and go gaming or playing with their friends or whatever it is that they do. And that's really, really fundamental, not just for their own mental health, but for how they form relationships when they're older, how they show up in society. We know that it has a really big impact in society, how they show up in school, their behavior in school and education, how they are with their friends, across the whole gamut, really.
So it sounds to me like a lot of the negative outcomes for divorce are actually not about divorce itself, as we know, but more about the way in which the divorce is managed, and that you can protect your kids with your own behavior and you can give them a chance to thrive. I love the idea that actually the barriers to entry are quite low here, aren't they? In terms of, like you say, this is not about skipping off into the sunset with your ex. And it's not about everybody having to have joint Christmases, joint holidays, we all go on holiday together. We're all so great at co-parenting. You're not saying that that's the ultimate aim here. The aim is good enough. And I don't think good enough is talked about very much, is it, in what we do? There's a lot of pressure on people to be, very self-sacrificing and very top of the class and all the rest of it. But actually, this is about small shifts in behavior that actually potentially have quite a big impact on your children and the outcomes for your children.
100%. And those small shifts can be quite easy to make, but they are a choice, right? Because it's very easy to dislike your ex. Okay, very, very easy. Probably you do dislike them to a certain degree. You're getting divorced or you're separating. However, it's about shifting the idea of the relationship from a kind of a marriage or a partnership into just a parental relationship. And your kids, you're going to have to co-parent and parent with this person for a while, because your children aren't going anywhere, right? So it's important to provide that stability for your kids. And if you think of it like a bone, right? You break a bone, you break your arm, and if you have a clean break, the arm heals well. If you shatter your arm, and there's there's bits of bone everywhere, it's much harder for that bone to heal properly and strongly. It's the same in relationships. We have a responsibility to, fine, we're breaking up, okay, but we have a responsibility to make sure that's a clean break, a well-managed break, a well-structured break, and how we parent and co-parent needs to reflect that too.
Yeah. I'm just going to draw the distinction here. When you say a clean break, we don't mean this in financial terms, because I know that some people will have listened to the podcast where we talk about clean breaks financially. So just to make that
absolutely, I'm just children here, parenting here.
Yeah. No, and it's a really nice analogy, Marcie. It kind of brings it to life, doesn't it? The idea of having that very, that break that's easier to heal than, a really messy, horrible, kind of jagged one where as you say, you've got splinters that are sort of all over the place. I like that. I mean, what do you see doing, talking to parents as you do and working with them and coaching? You've got to get either one or both of them into the kind of coaching methodology. What do you see as the most common obstacles? What stops people? Because it all sounds very good, doesn't it? It sounds like a bit of a no-brainer, but we know that life's not like that. It's hard. This stuff is hard. Yes, we make it sound easy and simple. We don't make it sound easy. We make it sound simple because we're trying to communicate something. But what stops people from doing this?
Well, knowing about it definitely is one thing. Can be cost as well, which is why we've developed the online course to make it much more accessible for people. Mostly it's about not wanting to show up and be vulnerable, and it's a bit of fear around actually having to take responsibility for their actions. Usually by about 10 minutes into the first session, that's gone away. But it's getting parents to realize that actually this is going to help and benefit their kids. When they can see that, then they come.
And I guess as well, there's a bit of a societal barrier in that I don't think we talk very much, do we, about that transition from parent to co-parent. Parenting and co-parenting to me feel like very different roles. And the fact that we have to transition from one to the other doesn't get much attention. We all know that, you have to get divorced, and we all know that you've got to sort finances out, and we know you've got to make arrangements for your children in terms of where they're going to be and how they're going to see each parent. But nobody talks about the mental shift from, being a parent to being a co-parent. And when the relationship breaks down, I think of it as oil that sort of oils the wheels of the parenting relation. Some of that is obviously lost. It leaks out because the love between the two of you isn't there anymore. What do you think that shift is? How do you make the shift from parent to co-parent?
Well, it's hard. You're absolutely right. When we talk about it, we try and help people that they're moving from one shape of system to a different shape of system. So if you think they're going from kind of maybe a circle where they're all in the same kind of unit to a line where there's a parent at each end and the kids in the middle, but they're still on the same line, they're still part of the same family system. The children still have the same parents. And when you can explain it from the children's perspective, your children, you might be getting divorced and you might not want anything to do with each other, but your children still have you both as parents. So what we work with parents to achieve is to make it more of a business arrangement in many ways, more transactional, much less emotion, taking the emotion out of it, making the interactions, especially if it's difficult, making the interactions very short, very focused, not brutal, still soft and respectful, but with a very clear purpose. So you eliminate any room for emotion to come in, you eliminate any miscellaneous items to come in. And I think when you've been doing that and kind of living that for 12 months, it becomes much easier then to kind of step into that place. And then from that, sometimes we see parents become more allies and maybe they meet as a kind of family unit, but that's not the expectation at all. We don't set out to achieve that utopia. We just set out to achieve something that works for the kids.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the course then. So you've been parent coaching for some time now. You've got all of this experience. You mentioned earlier one of the barriers to coming into using coaching sometime was cost. So you've designed a course to help more parents. Tell us about the course, and then let's talk about some of the kind of key coaching that goes on the course so people get a flavour of what it is they can achieve.
Okay, so absolutely. So, it is expensive to hire a coach and, there aren't many coaches. So we don't have the reach that we wanted to have because we don't think that these skills should be exclusive. We think they should be inclusive. So it was during lockdown, and that's a phrase we've all heard a lot, isn't it? During lockdown, I decided to become a baker. And so during lockdown, I decided that, I need to put this online. So I have the methodology. I know it works, but how do you translate that into an online course? So I work with a specialist online trainer. And I work with a memory specialist to help parents who are going through the course, especially if they're in high states of emotion, remember the tools that they're learning. So it's a 10-module course. The modules are around 25 to 35 minutes each. It's self-paced, so parents can go through it at their own pace. They can buy it at 3 a.m. if they want to, and they can start it at 3:01 if they need to. And each module is a combination of recapping a little bit about what we learned previously, the learning for that module, so whatever the topic is for that module, and then 1 or 2 practical tools that they can go away with immediately and use. It's that practical element that I think is really important because it's no good if they can't use it. So we developed that. We launched it not that long ago in September, and it's available now. Lawyers and mediators are recommending it to clients. It's had really, really positive feedback, which is great. And at the end of it, we give out a certificate, just so parents know that they've been through it. And so they can demonstrate that, they are showing up to this as something that's important to them.
I love what you say about the practical stuff, because it's all very well to read the theory about this, isn't it? But unless you can actually go away and implement something, it's just sort of, it doesn't even sit in your brain that long. And the other thing I really liked about it was working with the memory specialist, because how many of us have been on courses and thought, yeah, I really understand this. I really like it. And then, a week later, you've completely forgotten everything about it. And it's not even there, is it? In the recesses of your mind, it's buried, never to be retrieved again. So I think that sounds really, the fact that you're doing it and practicing it, you've got practical things to do, but also that it's been designed in a way that helps you remember it. I think that makes it really unique and special. So just give us an outline of some of the topics. I don't want you to give everything away, but just give us an outline of some of the sorts of tools and techniques or some of the little topic headings that you cover to give people a flavour of what they might learn.
Sure. So, well, it starts out with this idea of kind of understanding why it's important to co-parent, but it moves quite quickly into self-managing any emotions you might be feeling in a really practical way. And we do that really early on because then it becomes easier to take some of the more practical steps around communication. And then we move into this idea of seeing things from each other's perspective and why that's important, not necessarily agreeing with each other, but how to kind of understand why your ex's point of view in this kind of conversation. And then, self-management, setting boundaries. And then we move into communication, all about how you listen without saying too much, but how you listen effectively, how you make someone feel heard. And by doing that, you completely de-escalate the conflict. And when you've got that one under your belt, we move into very practical decision making. And I know one of the things that you mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast was around inflammatory language. And that is something that we spend a little bit of time on too, because that language, when you're speaking to each other, is really important, but also when you're speaking about your co-parent in the general wider world, that's also really important to kind of be able to identify when you're using language that's maybe not so helpful.
Oh, there's lots to unpack in there. When you were talking about managing emotions, I just got this image of that whole put your own oxygen mask on first kind of business. So if you can manage your own emotions, you've got your oxygen mask on, you're in a much better place then, to help your child or even to help the other co-parent. You are automatically, like you said at the beginning, shifting the way you interact by managing your own emotions. And I guess it's that difference between responding and reacting, isn't it? So learn to respond rather than react. What are some of the common emotions that people experience as they begin that co-parenting journey?
Fear. Fear is the biggest one. And whether it's fear that makes you afraid or fear that makes you angry or fear that makes you want to stick your head in the sand, usually there is an element of fear in this world that we are working in. Fear of losing your kids, fear of, the conflict, confrontation. So that's, I know I've said fear about 6 times now, but that's definitely the main emotion. And then anger and upset and loss of trust are other really, really big ones too.
Yeah, I can see that. I think as well for me, when I talk to co-parents, there's a lot of kind of trying to attribute motive to the other parent that is sometimes really, one, sometimes really misses the mark because that wasn't the intent of the parent at all. But 2, it just kind of, it's pointless speculating almost, isn't it? But they're only doing this because of X, Y, and Z, or they're just trying to make me look this, or they're just trying to push so-and-so to do, and that sort of attributing motive where sometimes there isn't any or it's different. I'm not saying it's always absent, but I think that can be quite a tricky one to navigate for people, can't it? Because you're in a heightened state when you're getting divorced, I guess, and you're sort of trying to protect yourself and your future, and co-parenting requires you to leave that coat behind almost, doesn't it? That's tricky.
Yes, and one of the ways that we manage that is by enabling parents to see things from their children's perspective. So forgetting the motive, leaving the motive behind. Well, hang on a minute, what does your child need? What does your child think? What would they say in response to this? And helping them get out of that blame situation that they're so obviously often in, and moving them out of that and moving them out of the kind of adult relationship into, okay, hang on, we're parents here. We've got to look towards the child. And what do they need? And that is when it takes a bit of practice, and we don't always get it right. I don't always get it right, and I've been doing this for 14 years. But more often than not, if you can do that, what happens is, as parents, you find a common ground. We call it a point of alignment, your child, basically. And when you both recognize, actually, all that noise isn't helping us raise our kids. So we need to just forget the noise, whatever we think about each other. I still don't like you. You still don't like me. But let's just remember that we've got to bring up the kids, and they are more important than all of that noise that's going on.
Yeah. And what happens when a parent just can't manage the emotions? Are there things you can do being on the receiving end of that? Because, the temptation is to just jump in and do the whole calm down, don't speak to me like that. Don't, to go back in to try and manage them effectively? Are there more effective ways than that overt management?
Actually, the opposite of that. Don't say anything. I mean, don't stonewall them, but just stop yourself from trying to solve it or reacting to it, and let them get off their chest whatever it is they need to get off their chest, and then wait a little bit longer, and then let the rest of it come out. And once they've kind of vented and got everything out, they're going to feel a lot calmer, and then you can start to interact with them.
That's interesting. Now, we went on to talk about inflammatory language, and you're right, I said we'd have a little bit of a chat about that. What do we mean? Is there a definition of what inflammatory language is, or is it one of those things that what's inflammatory to me might not be inflammatory to you? So how, first of all, let's define it if we can.
Inflammatory language is something that usually makes us, if we're on the receiving end of it, feel angry or frustrated or annoyed or upset. It's a way of speaking that escalates a situation. And it's a way of speaking that invites an angry response from your co-parent. So it's often said in the heat of the moment. It's often said impulsively without much consideration. Yeah, and I think so that is how we define it at the co-parent way.
And do people deliberately use inflammatory language? And do we get to a situation where people are doing it on purpose, effectively, because they want to get the rise? It makes them feel somehow superior. Do you see, is that a typical sort of co-parenting scenario?
Yes, and it can be done, with the sweetest of smiles, and, it can be done very passively as well. Yes, is the short answer to that question.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You say it can be done very passively. You imagine inflammatory, the first thing you think of is some really sort of either aggressive or sweary or kind of, real nastiness. But actually, well, you're right. There's some really inflammatory stuff that goes on with, as you say, very passively, very quietly, and sort of smiling through gritted teeth almost, isn't there? So I see that it's slightly more complicated. So let's say one of you engages in this kind of escalatory language. How do you respond to it? What do we say? What do we do to either neutralize it or de-escalate it?
Well, the first thing is to maybe give some examples of it. So things like, you always do this, or you never do this, or, like those kinds of very accusatory things, which can also be said, oh, you're always late, could also be said really softly. But if it triggers somebody and it kind of pushes their buttons, that's what makes it inflammatory. And we always have hot topics, that lead to arguments. I worked with a couple quite recently, and there had been an affair and they'd got divorced, and the dad was living with the new partner, and the mum would always refer to the new partner as her, right? She would never refer to the new partner by her name. Now, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's pretty inflammatory. But she didn't realize that the longer impact of what she was doing. So it was all very short term. She wanted to get at her ex. But when we worked with her and she started to see actually it was having a bigger impact, it's having an impact on the children, she started to realize, oh, actually, I need to scale back here. And I need to kind of not do that. So just sometimes that awareness of the bigger impact of that kinds of language is really important. And sorry, I think you asked me what to do when someone is using that inflammatory language at you. Well, that's all about self-management, and that is about putting some distance between you and your response. So, that we call it in our course, we call it the pause button or the shut up button or whatever you want to call it, but just having the impetus to go, don't respond, don't respond, don't respond, and waiting. And actually, if you wait and if you don't respond, the person that's using that kind of language, it just kind of dissipates much more quickly. And if you don't react, okay, all about self-management, which of course we teach. But if you don't react, then they are much less likely to use it again because they see it has no impact.
I can't tell you the number of times I've sat in coaching sessions when somebody says something and I'm willing, like some mind Jedi, willing the other person not to say anything or not to respond. Like, don't react to that. Don't react to that. Just don't respond. And you're sort of trying to communicate it through your eyes. But it's true, isn't it? Because the minute you get that reaction, you've then got that. And I guess it's like
escalates.
Picking a scab, isn't it? It's just going back to the scab and picking it off again and all the blood's coming out again.
So it is it's just, and we can say this because we've been through this. So it's not like we haven't worn the t-shirt long enough, Marcie, isn't it? But so it is hard, and it does take practice. And I also think the thing for me is, just because you think you've got it licked, it doesn't mean you have in every situation. And that's okay too. You don't have to beat yourself up and think you're going back to the beginning. Just this is a process, and it's something that we learn to do. And each time we achieve it, that's a big tick in the box for our kids. And if we achieve it 10 times and then we fall off a bit of a cliff for another 2 times, that's okay too. We're not going back to square one. We're building and we're building and we're building up. And I think that's so important that people try and think about it in that sort of more positive way.
It's what you said before, it's about kind of just making it good enough, making it better than it was. If you can make it better than it was last time, that's brilliant. Well done. And, there will always be different hurdles, different triggers, different curveballs that make us go, what? And maybe not respond how we would wish to respond. But if we have the track record of doing it better, it becomes easier to resolve as co-parents, to go, do you know what? I know I lost my temper at you. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have done that. And it goes. You're not kind of back to square one, like you just said.
Yeah. And I think it's, for me, there's kind of like stages of being able to change behavior. So that first stage, as you were just saying in your example about that lady, is just becoming aware that you're doing it. And that's kind of step 1, isn't it? Just becoming aware. And then step 2 is catching it and holding it. And then step 3 maybe is trying to do something differently and experimenting with what works. I guess with inflammatory language and with communication, there's no one size fits all. And so it's a dynamic system. It's going to depend on how your partner reacts as to what strategies work and don't work.
Yeah. And, and if there are new partners in the mix, then that also has an impact.
Yeah, and that brings a whole new dimension, doesn't it? Which we haven't got time to go into now, but it brings a whole new dimension to the way you communicate as a family. And I guess that's a new sort of facet of modern life, isn't it? That we've all got extended relationships now with lots of different people who are involved in our kids' lives. And it feels to me like that's good for children to have. The more people that love them, the better.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's definitely a topic for another podcast, but the more exposure they have to different people, the more rounded they become, I believe.
Is there anything else about the course, Marcie, that you want to tell people at this stage? You've done a really great job of outlining the sorts of skills that people can pick up, how it can work for one person if you can't get both of you on board. Is there anything else that you think is really important just to mention here?
That it works. This is methodology that we've been using for a number of years, and it really, really will help. And the tools on the course you can use in your co-parenting or in other areas of your life. And I think that's what makes it like really unique, is that it's practical and it has an impact. So definitely check it out. It's £249 for the whole thing. You get access to it for a year.
And anybody who's a customer of Amicable, it will appear on your dashboard too. So you can go onto the website, you can go onto your dashboard and find it there. But it's a brilliant course. And as you say, it has such a massive impact on children's lives that it's well worth having a look at, isn't it? And yes, we know it's cost of living crisis, and yes, it's £250 still, but I think it's the investment in terms of what it can bring you, and the fact that having been through the other side of this, where it is really tricky to co-parent, I can only say that I wish I'd know. I wish this had been around when I was going through my transition from parent to co-parent, because it's just such a fantastic way of making that move and shifting those thoughts and putting the children right front and center of everything that you do.
And I think when you can do that, you get your life back. You're not so it is a good investment, because once you can do the co-parenting thing, you can just go and live your life and rebuild if you need to rebuild, or kind of add in. And I think, that's the bit that we need to remember, is that, we are people. Yes, we are parents, but we are also people, and we need to have fulfilled lives too. And this enables that to happen.
Yeah, because the worst thing is when it's just hanging over you all the time, isn't it? And it's colouring everything you do. It's impacting how you are at work, how you are with your friends, how you form new relationships. It's part of the necessary self-care to moving on, isn't it? As far as I see.
Yeah.
Well, look, we'll put a link in the show notes as well so people can find it there. But Marcie, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and telling us all about this new course. Really look forward to hearing more from you in the future as well. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, you can find out more about the show and you can follow us and subscribe. Give us a like. We're thedivorcepodcast.com. You can find out more about new episodes on Twitter @divorce_podcast. And you can follow me on Twitter too @Kate_Daly. Thanks so much for listening and see you on the next episode.